The year is 1979, and Japan is facing a serious problem. More and more people are dying every year from venomous bites from a deadly snake species. The authorities came up with what seemed like the perfect solution. We declare the introduction of specified mongoose on Amami Oshima. They released a predator on the island, molded by nature to hunt and devour snakes.
Mongoose is quite the predator itself, and its lightning-fast reflexes and thick hide have enabled snakes like the cobra to its list of favored foods.
It was a stroke of genius, making nature fight itself and save human lives. But just 25 years later, everything went downhill. The snake-killing predator thrived in the most unexpected manner, causing more harm than good.
The mongoose population at Kawainui Marsh has exploded in recent years, killing endangered birds.
The genius plan quickly spiraled into a deadly ecological disaster that has left a lasting mark on the island. The deadliest of infestations. Amami Oshima is a large island in the Amami archipelago, and it is a part of the Japanese territories. And like many other islands in the region, Amami Oshima is home to several species of snakes. But one species stands out as the deadliest: the habu snake. Habu snakes are amongst the most dangerous snakes in the world, thanks to their extremely effective venom. One bite can lead to tissue necrosis, causing death within hours. But that alone isn't the problem. Not only are habu snakes extremely venomous, but they are also very aggressive. Instead of fleeing, they prefer to attack, often unprovoked. On Amami Oshima, these snakes are everywhere, in forests, parks, and even the rice paddies where farmers work. And that posed a major problem. In 1980 alone, there were 400 reported snake bites from the habu snakes. And of the 400, tens of people lost their lives. In the absence of a natural predator, the habu snake population thrived. It came to a point where people were often getting bitten in their own homes. For the people living on Amami Oshima, the habu snake was an ever-present threat, not just physically, but also mentally. People knew that simply walking through grass could be deadly. Nowhere was safe. And that fact alone forced the inhabitants to always be on the edge, always afraid. Things were made worse because of the lack of medical treatment. While there was an antivenom for the habu snake's venom, it wasn't always available to the victims. The antivenom needed to be kept at a low temperature for it to remain effective. And in the 90s, several regions of the Amami Oshima Island lacked electricity, which in turn meant no means of refrigeration. So the antivenom couldn't be made readily available for most of the island, especially in rural areas where the lack of electricity made it impossible to keep the antivenom cool enough for it to stay effective. The entirety of Amami Oshima had become a death trap. It was the ideal breeding ground for the habu snake, and human lives were being lost in the process. As the death toll rose and the fear spread like wildfire, the Japanese authorities came under pressure to protect their citizens. They needed to come up with a solution, and they needed to do it fast. The first solution they contemplated was to build electrical infrastructure for the entirety of the Amami Oshima Island. But that would have taken years to finish. They couldn't wait for a new antivenom to be developed either. That wouldn't require refrigeration to stay effective. Finally, the authorities came up with a genius plan. They examined how, in other regions, snake populations are naturally controlled. In those regions, snakes often have a predator of their own. And that was what Amami Oshima was lacking. An animal that could not only resist the venom of the habu snake, but also actively hunt them. The predator needed to be the perfect enemy of the habu snake. But where could such a predator even exist? The answer lay with the habu snake's distant cousins. The ideal predator. The authorities studied other venomous snakes that have a known predator, like the king cobra. These snakes are also extremely venomous, just like the habu snake. But one creature has managed to dominate them, making them one of its food sources. That creature is the mongoose. The mongoose has been naturally gifted with the necessary capabilities to fight and kill snakes. Their hides are thick, and their reflexes so fast that even the quickest snakes cannot keep up. They can move quickly, countering every stroke from the snake and landing deadly blows within the fraction of a second. They have been known to kill snakes like the king cobra and vipers in a matter of seconds. But the true magic lies in their very blood. Due to specific mutations in their bodies, mongooses are usually resistant to even the deadliest venoms that snakes produce. So even if they get bitten, they can usually walk it off, ready for the next hunt. Due to these genetic gifts and a hereditary knack for hunting snakes, the mongoose has been an essential ecological species, keeping snake populations in check in regions like Southeast Asia. The Japanese authorities believed they had found the perfect solution to their snake problem: a hunter who simply could not fail. And so, a plan was formed. These mongooses would be introduced to the infested regions and hopefully get rid of the problem. From among the different types of mongooses, the authorities chose the small Indian mongoose. The reasoning was logical, since the small Indian mongoose had already been successful in reducing snake populations in the Caribbean islands and the Dalmatian islands. It was a tried and tested method. Once the mongooses had integrated themselves into the ecology of the Amami Oshima island, they would work as a natural balancer, keeping the habu snake population in check while also getting rid of another problem the island was facing: rats. The Amami Oshima Island had a large population of black rats, and aside from disease, they posed another issue for the farming-dependent population. These rats would gnaw away at the sugarcane plantations, ruining entire harvests. Luckily, the small Indian mongooses also fed on rats as one of their primary food sources. So by introducing them to the island, the authorities could kill two birds with one stone, getting rid of both the black rats and the habu snakes. It was certainly the perfect plan, and the public agreed. The initiative was welcomed across the island, with government figures applauding it as an ingenious solution to a growing problem. The Japanese authorities wasted no time and put the plan into action in 1979. 30 small Indian mongooses were released into the wild on the Amami Oshima Island, setting off a chain of events that no one had expected. When plans go wrong. The outlook of the plan was extremely positive. The mongooses would multiply and go after their natural prey, which on this island would be the habu snake. Having released the initial population of 30 mongooses, the authorities needed only to wait for the results to come in. They were expecting the snake population to go down, the death toll to completely go away, and snake sightings to become a rarity instead of the norm. But as years passed, the unexpected happened. The first warnings came from the Amami Mammalogical Society. Studies were conducted, and they showed that the habu snake population had not gone down at all. But why? The answer became painfully obvious once the behavior of the habu snake and the small Indian mongoose was observed side by side. Mongooses are diurnal creatures, meaning they are most active during the day. They prefer to hunt and feed during the day. And what the authorities had failed to take into account was the fact that habu snakes are nocturnal. These snakes were most active during the night. They barely ever leave their hiding places during the day. The result of this oversight was that the entire plan failed. The mongooses and the snakes were inhabiting the same islands, but their active hours were completely isolated. This meant that the habu snakes and the mongooses were never really coming across each other in the wild. But that wasn't even the only oversight by the authorities. Even if the snakes and the mongooses were to come across each other every now and then, the mongooses almost never hunted the snakes. The reason was simple. It was far too much effort, since there was easier prey around. You see, in regions where mongooses actively hunt deadly snakes, it is because there is no other food source available. So, fighting the snakes is a matter of life and death for the mongooses, a choice between a risky meal or starvation. But the same was not the case for the mongooses released on the Amami Oshima Island. They had plenty of other prey to feed upon, like the rats or birds and the rabbits that roamed freely. Choosing between them and the snakes was easy for the mongooses. The easiest meal is the best. No risk of getting hurt, and no fear of starvation. The mongooses had been brought in for one job, and they had completely ignored that from the very beginning. But the blame could hardly be placed on the animal. The lack of proper research and a lack of understanding of basic ecology had led to this massive failure. Had the authorities even done the basic research on the behaviors of the animals they were dealing with, the whole issue could have been avoided. If the failure to reduce the snake population had been the only problem with the plan, it would have been a footnote in history. But this was far from the worst of it, because the real disaster had been happening right under the nose of the authorities without them even realizing it. Releasing the mongooses into the wild was a bigger mistake than the authorities realized, and the consequences were going to be of paramount importance. The unexpected damage. An important thing to know about islands is that their ecosystems are far more complicated due to their isolation from other landmasses. This isolation means that unique behaviors and species evolve on these islands, which, while being diverse, don't often respond well to sudden changes. And the same is true for Amami Oshima. It is a pretty isolated island, which is why it has a rather unique set of creatures inhabiting it that are not found in other parts of the world. And since the island lacks any large predators, many of the animals that call Amami Oshima home have not developed the defenses to ward off predators. In many cases, they don't even know how to run away when approached by danger, since the island never had anything capable of hunting them in the past. So when the authorities released such a successful predator as the mongooses into the wild, it spelled disaster for nearly every prey species on Amami Oshima that could be on the mongoose's menu. By 1989, the Amami Mammalogical Society had started studying the ecological damage that the mongooses were wreaking, and the results were quite horrifying. Endemic species like Amami Ishikawa's frog and the Amami woodcock saw a rapid decline in population as the mongooses found them to be easy meals. And since these species are found nowhere else in the world except for the islands in the region, their loss would have spelled complete extinction. The mongooses had found an unlimited source of food, and when food is abundant, biology dictates that there will be an explosion in population, and that was exactly what happened. A small Indian mongoose can have a litter of 1 to 5 babies, meaning they are capable of reproducing fast. By 2002, the mere 30 mongooses that had been released on the island had turned into a staggering 10,000. This hungry army was well on its way to raise the island clean of several species. Aside from the Amami Ishikawa's frog and the Amami woodcock, there were several other animals whose population was being driven down by the feeding frenzy of the mongooses. One of the most important animals being hunted to extinction by the new predators was the Amami rabbit. This rabbit species is only found on one other island besides Amami Oshima. Not only that, but it holds special status as being the last remaining remnants of an ancient rabbit species that died out everywhere else in the world. Because of this, The Amami rabbit is often called a living fossil. This species had survived for millions of years, living through ice ages and disasters long before humans. They held so much importance that the Japanese had declared the species a natural monument, preventing any hunting. And the last remnants of this ancient animal were about to be devoured by an invasive species that humans introduced. And then there were the other valuable species, like the Amami thrush, Ryukyu long-haired rat, and Amami spiny rat, all species unique to Amami Oshima, that were experiencing a concerning decline in population. The culprit was not just the mongoose, but also those who had carelessly released them in the wild. And when the population of a species in such a complex ecosystem as that of an isolated island goes down, there are far-reaching, unexpected consequences. Butterfly effect. The mongooses that were supposed to be snake killers began destroying the ecosystems of other species on the island. They killed rabbits and rats and ate the eggs of the birds. And as the population of these species began to go down, the balance maintained by the island's ecology started to shift. Fewer eggs meant fewer birds, and fewer birds meant fewer eggs. Where once was an island filled with the sounds of the birds singing was now deafening silence. And since these birds played a key role in spreading the seeds of the plants they ate from, the vegetation suddenly couldn't reproduce as fast as it used to. And the insect populations that were being managed by the birds also started increasing. The balance was being changed completely. Even humans were being affected, as mongooses were also causing agricultural damage. The mongooses were destroying everything but the snakes they were supposed to kill. Not only that, but their population was growing at an unprecedented rate. So the problem was not going to go away with time. Rather, it would only grow. And since the mongooses had spread throughout the island in such a short span of time, the other species wouldn't have enough time to evolve against them or to learn behavior that would protect them. It was not nature taking its course, it was a bloodbath in earnest. And since this was an island, these species couldn't migrate to another place either. If nothing was done, several natural monuments would have been lost. Several species not found anywhere else in the world would go extinct. The whole island would change beyond recovery. The authorities knew that things were bad, and they needed to fix it. They needed to find a way to fight back. The good fight. The authorities did not waste time. They admitted that the mongoose program had been a complete failure. Not only that, but it was actively destroying the island's ecosystem. In the year 2000, the first initiative was launched to help counter this new problem. The government employed the help of the members of the Hunter Association. They were asked to trap and hunt mongooses on the island in exchange for subsidies. While there was some success in reducing the population of the mongooses this way, the impact was not nearly significant enough. For bounty hunters, trapping the mongooses in the mountainous regions of the island was proving too difficult. They were not experienced enough. The efforts needed to remedy the problem had to be more dedicated. Or else, the time would run out, and the already endangered native species would be wiped out. So, in 2005, the mongooses on the Amami Oshima were declared to be an invasive species. The authorities realized that half-serious measures were not going to cut it. So they created a group called the Amami Mongoose Busters. This group was going to specialize in eradicating the mongoose population completely from the island. It was certainly an ambitious aim, since it is notoriously difficult to remove an invasive species once it has taken hold of a place, especially if it has gone through a population burst, like the mongooses already did. The Amami Mongoose Busters were in for a long fight. a drawn-out battle. The fight against the mongooses was a fight against time. Still, it took a while for the authorities to develop effective extermination techniques. Initially, they tried putting traps alongside roads at the edge of vegetation. It was far quicker and more effortless than placing traps in the forest. But this strategy did not bear any fruit. The mongooses don't stray far from their home range, so the area these traps could cover was always too limited. Even if they did catch a mongoose every now and then, it didn't put enough of a dent in the overall population. The hunters had to be more precise in the placement of the traps, and to do so, they needed to venture into the forest. Even then, it wasn't easy. They first began tracking the movements of the mongoose to figure out what paths they were likely to use. Trail cameras were set up for observation, and the hunters had to learn how to follow the tracks of mongooses. Through these methods, they could figure out where they lived in the forest, which path they used, and where they hunted. They would then place specialized traps made for catching mongooses in the area. This yielded better results. The Amami mongoose busters were catching nearly 2,000 mongooses a year through this method. The population of the invasive species was slowly thinning down. And it wasn't just these specialized traps. The group also trained dogs to hunt mongooses. These dogs were put to work in 2007, and they proved extremely useful. Now, instead of waiting for a mongoose to be caught in a trap, the hunters could actively look for the mongooses in their hiding places. The dogs would sniff out mongooses, and the hunters would then easily exterminate the pest. And in places where neither the traps nor the dogs could catch the mongooses, the hunters had to take some extreme measures. They would lure out and exterminate the mongooses using toxic bait. This was usually a last resort, but certainly a necessary one. And well, the efforts paid off in due time. A hard-won victory. Slowly but surely, the tide was turning. The mongoose busters were hard at work, going into dangerous forest territory infested with venomous habu snakes to lay down traps to catch the mongooses. In total, the group placed nearly 30,000 traps all over the island and nearly 300 trail cameras. They couldn't afford to miss even a single mongoose pair. Because if they did, the population would likely recover. After all, these thousands of mongooses infesting the island came from just 30 parents. So the mongoose busters had to be extremely thorough, and that meant putting their own lives at risk. They had to navigate thick vegetation, climb mountains, and go into areas where help couldn't reach them for hours in case of an emergency. But through their heroic efforts, a ray of hope could be seen. With over 2,000 mongooses being trapped every year, the island would have a chance to recover. Still, it was a long road ahead. The mongoose busters worked for year after year, with only one goal in mind: to save the native species on the island. They trapped and they hunted with their trained dogs by their sides. Their efforts were not for nothing, because sometime later, a difference could be seen. The trail cams showed fewer and fewer sightings. Traps were not capturing nearly as many mongooses as they were initially. This wasn't because the mongooses were acting smarter. Rather, their population was thinning out over the years. From tens of thousands, it went down to hundreds until, in April 2018, the last mongoose on Amami Oshima was caught. But the mongoose busters did not declare it a mission accomplished just yet. What if they had missed a few? What if the population rebounded back up? They waited and waited for years, monitoring the trail cameras and conducting surveys. 470 motion-detecting cameras were installed around the island to catch any mongooses left behind. But when 6 years had passed and not a single mongoose had been sighted, it became clear. The mongoose busters had won the long fight. They had successfully eliminated the invasive species from their beloved island, and the numbers were staggering. Around 32,000 mongooses were captured or exterminated throughout Amami Oshima during the 18 years the operation was underway, and it had cost the Japanese government $25 million to save the island from the brink of disaster. Finally, in 2024, the Ministry of the Environment announced to the world with confidence that the mongoose population on Amami Oshima had been completely eradicated. But the battle is not over. Nature still needs time to recover. A slow recovery. The animals that were affected by the sudden introduction of mongooses in their environment have started recovering. The population of the Amami rabbit, which was reduced to less than a quarter of what it was before, rose back up to a more stable level. The Amami spiny rat also made a swift recovery in their population, and so did the other endangered animals like the Ryukyu long-haired rat and the Amami thrush. With the return of the normative bird species to their usual population, the flora and fauna of the region have balanced out as well. As for the habu snakes, that was the core issue the authorities were trying to fix. The inhabitants of the island have found alternative methods of dealing with them. Learning from their mistakes, the authorities know that reducing the snake population would cause the ecological balance of the island to shift for the worse. So they have instead taken a more educational approach to the problem, teaching the island inhabitants how to protect themselves from the dangerous snakes. Additionally, with the advancement of technology, the antivenom is now more readily available in most parts of the island. This has resulted in far fewer instances of habu snake bites and far fewer deaths caused by the habu snakes. Instead of trying to bend nature to their will, the people living on Amami Oshima Island have learned to coexist with their reptilian neighbors. But this whole mongoose incident raises a bigger question for Japan. Because it may come as a surprise, but Amami Oshima is not the only place in Japan where mongooses have taken over. A bigger problem. Japan may have had its work cut out for it in Amami Oshima, but that is far from being the worst infestation of invasive species the country is facing. In 1910, long before mongooses were introduced in Amami Oshima, they were first released into the wild in Okinawa. Only 10 were released in Okinawa for controlling venomous snakes, but today, there is a far larger population that has grown and settled over the decades. And their growing number has become a huge issue for similar reasons to those in Amami Oshima. The only difference is that the ones in Okinawa pose a much greater threat to humans due to the disease they carry. These mongooses have been identified as known carriers of leptospira and rabies. Ever since the success in eradicating the invasive species in Amami Oshima, the authorities have been considering doing the same in Okinawa. But is that really possible? The number difference alone is too much to think about. Amami Oshima is just an island, yet Okinawa is a whole prefecture, much larger in size. There are far more mongooses at loose there, threatening an even more diverse range of species, like the Okinawa rails. But if anyone can pull this off, it is probably Japan. Why? Well, their accomplishment in Amami Oshima is already leaps ahead of the rest of the world. The small Indian mongoose has been a long-standing invasive species in several parts of the world. These creatures have taken over native habitats and hunted entire species to end in the Caribbean, Hawaii, and the Dalmatian Islands. No one around the world has been able to do what Japan did. The maximum anyone was able to accomplish was removing mongoose populations from areas less than a square mile in size. Amami Oshima, which Japanese authorities made mongoose-free in less than 20 years, is nearly 274 square miles in size. They did what no one else could, and they did it better and more efficiently. So I will say it again. If any country in the world can drive out an invasive species like the mongooses from a place as big as Okinawa, it is certainly going to be Japan. But what do you think? Can they accomplish such a feat? Could Japan continue being a pioneer in fighting back against invasive species? Let me know your thoughts in the comments down below. I would love to read them all. And while you are at it, be sure to like the video, share it, and subscribe to the channel. Until next time, goodbye and stay curious.